nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. So Elizabeth of Portugal is our saint for today. She was born in the year 1271 and died in the year 1336. And some very interesting stories here showing the importance of holy women and mothers. And I would say an authentic example of proper feminism. We will see that. So she was born to the royal family of Aragon in Spain, and she was very pious as a young child. She said the full divine office. She fasted and prayed and attended Mass twice per day. She had the sadness, as many young women of the time did, of being married to, the king, but he wasn't a very good example. He had a rather licentious life, and he wasn't even Catholic. And that was King Denis of Portugal. So although she was queen and she was able to continue all the pious practices of her youth, it made her subject to the jealousy of other people in the court. For when, any household, no matter how large it is or small, takes after the example of the leader, the king or the father. And so when the king is vicious and licentious, so is the court. And so Queen Elizabeth comes into this, and everybody who's living a bad life, nobody likes to be shown up. They don't like to see the example of virtue and goodness, which only serves to make their wickedness more apparent. So she had to endure that, as well as she endured the infidelity of her husband in their early marriage. But she continued, for her part, to remain utterly faithful and devoted, and would not criticize her husband or attack him or blame him, but she continued her fasting and prayers and all of her good works. Now, there is a rather miraculous story of her husband's conversion, and this kind of involves another young man, a young page of the queen, who took after her example, and this young page of Queen Elizabeth, was very pious as well. Just like the queen had to deal with jealousy, so did this young page of hers, and another wicked a young page accused him to the king of some kind of crime or whatever. Well, the king, of course, being wicked himself, is all too ready to believe gossip and slander, and so he, in a rage, he sends down to the keeper of the furnace that he's going to send a page to him, and the keeper of the furnace needs to throw the first page that comes to him into the fire. So the king summons this virtuous young page and tells him, bring this message to the keeper of the furnace. So he goes, but this young page along the way, he stops to hear Mass. And as he arrives, but Mass has already started, so he stays to hear another one. In the meantime, the king becomes impatient, and he tells the wicked page who made the accusation in the first place, go to the furnace and see if that young page has been thrown in already. Well, that young page hurries to the furnace, eager to see the outcome. Well, he's the first one there. The keeper of the furnace throws him in, and then the other page comes by. So thus, the page his life was saved. His innocence was proven because he was pious and attended Mass twice a day, like his mistress, the queen, did. This convinced the king of, the whole evil plot came out, and the king was stricken by this, and that affected his conversion. So he became very devoted to Queen Elizabeth after that, and he entrusted to her many of the political affairs of the kingdom, and she became his trusted counselor and his advisor due to her example and quiet way of living. And she didn't do this. She didn't do this by getting angry or shaking her fist or demanding things or whatever. She was simply lived a life of quiet virtue, and that is what got her that power and wealth. Which she didn't want for itself, but when it came, she used it to establish monasteries, churches, she rebuilt shrines, and she gave alms to the poor. She would also accompany him on several affairs of state of great importance. But she was not without her share of domestic heartaches, and many women struggle with keeping peace in the home, and a divided family is the sorrow of many wives and mothers. And Queen Elizabeth had to suffer this sorrow, but even to a greater degree. She had to witness the sorrow of her son Alfonso, getting so enraged at his father that he raised an army, and her husband and son were going to war with each other. That is a family dispute that doesn't usually get to that level in most families. And the reason was, sins of the past have a way of, we have to pay for them. They continue to cause trouble later in life. And remember I said that the King Denis, he was unfaithful to his wife early in the marriage. Well, he had an illegitimate son from one of his many liaisons, and his rightful son, Alfonso, was jealous of that. He thought that this illegitimate son was getting too much attention from the king and so on, and that fueled his anger and bitterness, and that's why he raised that army against his own father. But this is really where we see Hollywood needs to make a movie on this woman, right? Because this is what real women would look like. Women who are powerful and bold and courageous, but also meek and humble and calm and virtuous. So this shows you that one powerful woman, one good example of femininity, is more powerful than like two armies put together. Because her husband and her son had their armies, and they were coming against each other. They'd had a few skirmishes, but this was going to be the decisive battle, and either her husband or her son was going to be killed as a result of this. So what did she do? Right? What is this one poor woman going to do when all of her efforts have been in vain, all of her prayers, all of her sighs and tears? What's she going to do? How's she going to stop this from happening? She goes to the battlefield, she gets on a horse, and she rides out in the middle between the two armies in her regal gown. I mean, what is she going to do? She didn't put on armor like St. Joan of Arc, but she rode out in between the two of them, and she commanded them to stop. Now, what if she had been ignored? What if the soldiers kept fighting anyways? What if she had been killed or captured? What if she had enraged her husband or her son? I mean, all kinds of things. Imagine the courage that would have taken, the risk to her honor, the risk to her reputation, the risk to her life. She put all of that aside and rode out there and demanded that her husband and son reconcile. And seeing that courage, you can imagine the effect that had on everybody. Here was this woman, this queen, displaying more masculinity than anybody else on the battlefield. Well, it was too much. It was too much for the soldiers and both of her husband and son, and they laid down their arms and they were reconciled. Now that right there, that's an example. That is real feminism. What feminism today, what all they're doing is they're not making women to be powerful. They're turning women into bitter, angry men. Because what do feminists want? They want power, they want control, they want to dominate. All those things are toxic masculinity. All those things that women complain about men, this toxic masculinity, women are like, you shouldn't have that. We want that. We want to be toxic men. You can't be toxic men. We want to be. That's what feminism is. That's what it's doing these days. But here's an example of real femininity, real power, like our Blessed Lady, bright as the sun, fair as the moon, terrible as an army set in battle array, more terrible than an army set in battle array, because, she was able to get two of them to stand down. So that's what women should really be like. And how did you get that? Not by nagging, not by complaining, not by getting angry, but like I said, going to Mass twice a day, reciting the full divine office, not criticizing her husband, even though he was unfaithful to her, but simply laying her sorrows before God and doing what she was supposed to do, which is take care of her household. So she succeeded in establishing peace in her household, and eventually her husband died of natural causes. She turned over the kingdom to her son and retired to a convent of the Poor Clares, which she herself had helped to build, and she intended to live there peacefully the rest of her days as a third-order Franciscan. But it's been said that the work of acquiring peace is anything but peaceful, and once more a dispute arose for which she had to settle, and this time it was once again to prevent her bellicose son from marching an army against his own son-in-law. So she was again successful, but due to her advanced age at this time, she was 67, it taxed her health such that she grew sick and died shortly afterward. And that was again in the year 1336, after a life of both heartache, but incredible accomplishment and incredible example. Now, I just mentioned yesterday was the feast of St. Cyril and Methodius, and they were instrumental in establishing Christianity in the Eastern Europe, in Poland, or Czech Republic, and Ukraine, and so on. We take it for granted that those countries exist, but they were just this mass of barbarian tribes at the time. It's Saints Cyril and Methodius gave structure and order to what eventually became Europe and the modern civilized world we have today. Elizabeth of Portugal did that for Portugal. She rebuilt shrines and churches and established monasteries, and all those things brought order and structure and goodness and grace. And monasteries and convents would teach, young boys and girls to read and write and learn. And she settled disputes and acquired peace for her kingdom. These are the people that built Europe. These are the people that built the modern society that we have. Saint Elizabeth of Portugal, and she's one of dozens and dozens and dozens of royalty who had everything at their disposal, all the wealth, all the power, all the esteem, and what did they do with it? They used it for the benefit of other people, and when the time came, either retirement or they laid it aside. They gave it away because that wasn't important to them anyways. This is the example of the Catholic Church. These are the lives of the saints, and it's a tragedy that the church calendar was revised so we don't have as many saints anymore, or that the ones we do, their stories are not being told properly. This needs to come back in the church, and we need to know that these are the people that founded the modern world we have, and they belong to the church. This is our history. The Catholic Church needs, like, Catholic History Month. That should be 12 months out of the year. Right, because everything we have is from the church. Architecture, music, reading, writing, colleges, advanced learning, hospitals, schools, all these things. It's all the Catholic Church. It's all the Catholic Church. So it's knowing our saints and knowing our history that lets us have the confidence that we need to bring these saints back. Right, to bring back speaking and talking about these saints and giving them the respect they deserve. And you know what their faith was? It's the faith that we have today. What kind of Mass do you think St. Elizabeth of Portugal was going to? It was this one. Mass was in Latin, and that's what that page was attending, and she and all of her court, and all the saints, Thomas Aquinas and so on. This is what they attended. This is the faith they had. This is the faith that established the world. And it's going to do it again. So we have to weather this storm that we're in, but by, just like Elizabeth of Portugal, it's not going to be by getting angry or throwing a fit or being rebellious or whatever. It's going to be trusting God, saying our prayers, and when the time comes, having the courage to ride out in between warring armies and risk our lives, our reputation, and everything we have to bring peace. That's what's going to bring back the church. We have to be willing and able to take such action, but it only comes after many years of meekness and humility. So let us keep that in mind and ask for those virtues through the intercession of Queen Elizabeth of Portugal. So may God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.